Hi Team Grade 4, welcome. It's so nice to have you today. Welcome to our science class. I am your teacher, Miss Yulita Brown Phillips. I am here today to take you into the wonderful land of science. Are you ready for the adventure in science land? Grab your pencil, grab your notebook and your lab coat because you might need to take some notes today. Are you ready for this adventure? Now, food is important. We love food. Don't you love food? I love food. Pizza, carrots, spaghetti, pumpkin, bora, chow mein, curry. Without food, we cannot live. All living things need food. Fishes, lions, snakes, humans, and even trees need food. But how do we get the food we need? In today's lesson, we will learn how living things get the food they need in order for them to grow and get energy. Now, living things need a constant supply of energy. We need energy to do all that we have to do. The sun provides that energy, which is transformed into food by plants through photosynthesis. So plants use the sun's energy to make food. Herbivores. Herbivores are plant-eating animals. They eat the plants and they receive energy. So, the plants use the sun energy to make food, and herbivore eat the plants and receive energy as a result of eating it. When the herbivore is eaten by a carnivore, and we know what is a carnivore is an animal that eats herbivores or eats other animals. The energy from the herbivore is transferred to the carnivore. The transfer of energy from one organism to another makes up a food chain. A food chain basically shows how plants and animals depend on each other. Here is an example of a simple food chain. Tree, deer, lion. The lion eats the deer. So the lion is a carnivore. The deer eats the tree, or the deer eats the plant. The deer is a herbivore, and the plant would have gotten its food from the sun. A habitat is where an organism lives. There are several food chains in any habitat. Most animals eat more than one type of food. Example, a bear eats fish, a bear eats berries, a bear eats honey, and a bear eats insects. All living things need food to provide materials for growth. Food chains start with organisms that make their own food called producers, and plants are the most common producers. Hence, a food chain always starts with a green plant. Animals are called consumers for the simple reason that they do not own food. They eat or consume other organisms. Now today, we will not be looking at the food chain, but we will be focusing on the food web. A food web is a model of intersecting food chains. When all the food chains are connected, it forms a web. Food webs show how the various organisms in the web are interdependent, how they depend on each other. In the food web shown here, we can see multiple arrows pointing to different animals, creating this web-like structure. The arrows show the direction the energy is transformed. Let's start with the corn plant. You have the corn, an arrow pointing to the grasshopper, an arrow pointing from the grasshopper to the frog, an arrow pointing from the frog to the python. Now the python eats the frog eats the grasshopper eats the corn plant. So you see, boys and girls, how the energy is transferred. The grasshopper got its energy from the plant. The frog got its from the grasshopper, and the python got its energy from the frog. Let's examine another one. You have mangoes, fruit fly, thrush, that's a bird, and the eagle. The eagle eats the thrush. The thrush eats the fruit fly. The fruit fly eats the mango. We can look at it in another way. The eagle eats the thrush. The thrush eats the dragonfly. The dragonfly eats the fruit fly. The fruit fly eats the mango. Boys and girls, did you notice that the eagle is at the top of the food web, which means it is not eaten by any other type of animals except by decomposers when it dies. The eagle is an example of an apex predator being at the top there. Now, one group of consumers that is often not shown in food webs are decomposers. Let's examine what are decomposers. Decomposers are organisms, mostly bacteria and fungi, that break down dead plants and animals, eventually turning them into nutrients that will be added to the soil. Now, these nutrients are extremely important to continue the cycle in the ecosystem. Slugs, earthworms, millipedes, and centipedes also help to break down dead things. Let's imagine what would happen without decomposers. The first thing that would happen, nutrients would not get to be recycled, and we would have dead materials piled up everywhere. So when you see an animal, let's say a dog for example, that was hit at the side of the road for days, and after a while it disappeared, did you ever ask yourself the question, where did it go? The decomposers are responsible for that. Without decomposers, we would have dead plants and dead animals piled up all over. Now, boys and girls, it's our trivia time. Did you know that the food web is a concept that expands on the food chain? The food web was introduced in 1927 by Charles Elton. So we want to thank Mr. Elton today for helping us to understand the concept of food webs. So boys and girls, I would have said quite a mouthful. Now it's your turn to take a little quiz. Don't get scared. It's all about what we discussed just now. The first question. Animals that help break down the dead organisms that fall to the ground are A. Producers, B. Consumers, C. Decomposers, D. Scavengers. Are you finished, boys and girls? Let's see what you have. In our discussion, we talked about the animals that help to control the pileup of dead materials all over. and we gave them a special name, and they were decomposers. So the answer for number 1 is C, decomposers. Animals that help break down the dead organisms that fall to the ground are decomposers. Number 2. An animal that eats only plants or producers is a or an A, consumer, B, herbivore, C, carnivore, D, omnivore. An animal that eats only plants or producers is a herbivore. Boys and girls, if you have that, put a big tick. Number 3. Which organism is a carnivore? Which organism is a carnivore? A, frog, B, grasshopper, C, caterpillar, D, none of them. Do you have none of them? None of the organisms there are carnivores. Number 4. The diagram above represents a something. Do you have food web? The diagram above represents a food web. That is correct. Put a tick there, boys and girls. Number 5. The something in the diagram is known as the apex predator. Let's see what you have. Do you have lion? The lion in the diagram is known as the apex predator. We had a discussion about that. The lion would be termed the apex predator because there is nothing else that is eating the lion. So boys and girls, I hope that you would have gotten all correct. Excellent work. So let's do a recap. A food chain is a chain that shows the relationship between species based upon their feeding. It shows the feeding habits of animals living in a given habitat. A food chain often begins with a plant because it is able to make its own food. Plants are known as producers. They use the sun's energy to produce food. Consumers can be carnivores or meat eaters only. Herbivores or plant eaters only. Omnivores, animals that eat plants and animals. And a scavenger, animals that eat dead animals. So they can all be classified as consumers. Decomposers. Decomposers are organisms, mostly bacteria and fungi, that break down dead plants and animals. A food web includes all the food chains in a habitat. A food web comprises of several food chains to show the interdependence between plants and animals in a given habitat. Boys and girls, this has brought us to the end of today's lesson. But I have a question for you. What is a scientist? Someone who wonders, observes, explores, experiments, measures, invents, draws, predicts, thinks. You are a scientist. Bye, grade 4. See you next time.